Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sports Speak for a new episode, the first episode of 2021. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
We also have Zoe Alter here. We will be breaking down the football playoff picture, 6 games. It's the biggest wild card weekend in NFL history with 6 games in action, even a game on Nickelodeon. So there's a lot to talk about heading into that and what happened with the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday night. But before we get to the sports end of things, I know, you've heard about this constantly. And if you don't want to hear about a brief discussion of what happened at the Capitol, I'm going to put a link to the timestamp when we start talking about the NFL. But I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't at least mention this because I think it connects to both sports and media. And those are the two things that this show is all about. Because once again, we've seen athletes and coaches, specifically in the NBA, be very outspoken about the events that happened at the Capitol on Wednesday. And I also think this is a real proving point for the media to really think about things as well. Because Joe Biden, when he was speaking on Wednesday about the events, something that he said that I think was particularly impactful, he was talking about the president's words, but I think words in general. He said at their best, they inspire, and at their worst, they incite. And I really think that shows the responsibility that anyone of power of language, and that's not just the president, that's everybody. People have to realize just because, that's not physical power, it still can engage people. And, over the last 4 years, I mean, you cannot deny that there has been a lot of language said by the president and by supporting media that have kind of fueled this rhetoric that I think ultimately inspired what happened on Wednesday. And, we kind of talked a little bit about politics on this show back in August when there were the game postponements in response to Black Lives Matter. And here, my main point is this, because, I mean, there is still a lot of people who, they're drawing comparisons between what happened on Wednesday to what happened in the summer. And let me be honest about something. I was, I understand the protests in the summer, and I was very supportive of the peaceful protests. And I also, even on the show, I called out the riots that were happening then, because I do not think that destroying property is, the most, the best solution to the problems that we have. In fact, I think it makes more trouble. But let me say this, anything that happened in the summer really does not compare to people storming a building, which is probably supposedly the most sacred and most secure of any in the United States, the US Capitol. The first time it has been breached since 1812. I mean, it's astounding. And, you can have your opinions on this, but for that to actually happen for the first time in 2 centuries, there clearly are problems that have to be addressed. So Zoe, I'm going to turn it first to you. I mean, what are your opinions on just everything that I know this is kind of a broad question here, but just
I mean, my opinions in general about stuff like this, but going into this, seeing it on the news, I was really surprised about it. And I think what bothered me even more was the fact that no one really did anything about it. And for me, it was looking in whatever anyone has to say about the administration. What I have to say about them isn't good, I'll tell you that. But like whatever anyone has to say about the administration, looking in on it, your president told them it's okay. We still love you. You can still do this. They put all those senators in danger, not only the Senate, the House, but there was a live event going on the Senate floor. There was a vote being counted. There were things going on. And by doing that, Trump didn't only put everyone around the Capitol and everyone there in danger, but he put his senators in danger. He put every single person in that room. I don't know if you guys saw the pictures. I'm sure you did. They're all over the news, but of the senators, like literally under chairs and guys around with guns, like just pistols. Like, why is that happening? We're not one of the nations who's underdeveloped and this happens and you have people fight back against the government. We're America. We're supposed to be what everyone looks up to. And you don't always have to be what everyone looks up to. But we hold ourselves to a certain standard. And the fact that this is not even up to half of the standard we hold ourselves at, I think that said a lot about it. And the other thing that I thought was a lot about it is the fact that Pence had to step up and do something, which in itself I didn't think he would. But the fact that he did, I think, shows you something about Trump is that he would have let his senators die. He would have let every single one of them die. He would have let his people go in and do whatever they were going to do. And he wouldn't have cared. He would have still supported them. And also, one more thing, and then I'll let you go, Tim, because I could talk about this all day. I swear I get so mad about it. But, constant sitting in front of the TV watching. But the other thing that really bothered me was the fact that there's the whole thing that happened with the police in the summer, right? And the police were told to not go near and not engage, of course, by Trump. Who else would it be? But the fact that the police, almost in a sense, weren't really doing much about it. You saw the pictures of the police like hanging out in the building with people. I know it's supposed to be one of the most secure buildings. Usually, like I was talking to my mom and she was saying, usually you can't even get in there with like a hairbrush. Like you cannot go in with anything. And the fact that all those people went after that one African-American policeman who was standing there, I think that was terrifying to watch. The way the police handled it is a whole nother thing. And the way the government handled it is a whole nother thing. And that's another topic. But the main thing that really, really irks me is that, one, that's one of the most sacred like buildings of our nation, as you said, Eddie. And two, the fact that if we think about this for a minute, if those were people of color, can you imagine what would have happened? That would have gone down in history as a massacre because there's no other way it would have happened. Trump would have told his police, go all out. And the truth is, the police really weren't going to hurt these people because these are the only people that want them still here. So I think it was a lot to process, but more than anything, it was really, really disrespectful. And it showed the true colors that a lot of us have seen all along if you've been following. But it was a wake-up call for even the people who were under Trump, like Pence and other people who have blindly been supporting him without realizing the terror he's already caused. And yeah, Tim, I'll turn it over to you. I'll stop talking. I know. I could go on about this forever. I know.
No, that's where I agree. And I'm not going to go into the political aspect of everything. But to me, as someone a part of media and as someone that's aspiring to continue to be a part of media, your words and accountability hold a lot of responsibility in today's 21st century. And, for example, you could sit there and say something as a media member, an announcer, whatever, so be it, as an entertainer. You say something wrong, you can, in today's century and world, be canceled in an instant. And I'm not saying that's not the case for Donald Trump, but in regards to his power and his capabilities, he's held to a standard. He has a bunch of followers, more than anyone else in the world, more than any YouTuber, and so be an entertainer. And there's people that's going to do anything he says in an instant. He has the power literally in the palm of his hand. Whether you support him or not, that's not the fact of the matter. But it's the man in power and how he chooses to handle situations. And at the end of the day, his words mean something, just like how Joe Biden's words are going to mean something when he gets inaugurated in the presidency. So in that regard, it is absolutely terrible to see what happened. I think that, it is shameful for America because as what you mentioned, we aren't a third world developing country. We aren't trying to turn against government as individuals in America. But yet here we are still seeing this, and it's on a regular basis. And yes, I understand there are problems with America. I understand there are issues that we can fight about. But there are better methods than storming the Capitol. There are better methods than creating havoc in this country that we've seen over the past few months. The fact of the matter is that, yes, this solution isn't going to disappear and be solved tomorrow. But it all starts with change. And unfortunately, when there's constant denial, constant, basically pressure on either side arguing, there will never be a solution. And unfortunately, we haven't seen something like that in years because of how politically motivated this country has become over the last 20 years, especially with the fact of the big fake news thing that we've really come to see over the last 4 years, that responsibility has really all gone out the window in all aspects, not just media. So in sense of this final conclusion, it's a disaster. It's unfortunate. But at the end of the day, every person in this world, no matter if you're a big person in terms of media or if you're the president, whatever it may be or not, you have to be responsible for your actions. You have to be responsible for you say and how you handle yourself. And what we see is not acceptable. This is not what America was meant to be. Simple as put. We need to start thinking really mentally, not with our emotions. And if you're President Trump, when it's all said and done, you need to evaluate and realize that this is your fault to an extent because of the power of your words. They mean something at the end of the day. And I hope, obviously, the country as a whole takes this as a learning example and a lesson, especially Joe Biden, who's going to be stepping in his power, because this cannot continue to happen if this country wants to be successful in creating progress towards developing a brand new future.
And I want to just conclude with a couple things on this. First of all, I also think that social media plays, a huge role in this. And, I mean, we all know, you might agree or disagree with this, but, the idea of cancel culture, it's here. So you have to be careful with what you say, kind of looking back at sports. I mean, we've seen athletes like Josh Hader who have been, canceled because of, what they said in the past on Twitter. And, it's kind of interesting how now I feel like that with President Trump, there were more criticisms sometimes towards what he tweeted than to his actual policies or to what he actually did. And I feel like that's another reason why there's added personal responsibility. And I want to conclude with this, which is why, I know this is a sports show, but I did want to just bring up this topic because this truly is unprecedented. Because I remember like 5 or 6 years ago when my family took a tour of the Capitol. Just to take a tour of the Capitol, it involved making contact with our local congressman, Frank Pallone, going through all these hoops, and, the security was unbelievable, but the trip was memorable. And it's really heartbreaking to see, regardless of how you feel about the founding fathers or whatever, that's 2 centuries of history in there. And that's 2 centuries of history that were never breached. And to think that so many people who, I mean, the senators, the congressmen, even Vice President Pence, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, nothing. I mean, like, these people, they care about serving you. And, you have to be concerned when something like this happens. And these people, regardless of how you feel about them, they should not be put in danger when they're at work. And I mean, on a special day like this, which I know there were still going to be objections to the presidency, but, in all intents and purposes, this is a ceremonious day, and the transfer of power and the proof that democracy still works. Fortunately, we're still able to get that done, but it's really frustrating that that interruption happened. But I just wanted to bring that up. It's a topic that, it's uncomfortable to talk about, but it fits in with the sports world because we've seen athletes be outspoken, including football players, basketball players, in the last couple of days about everything that happened. But I am going to shift gears now back to the sports world because football is going on, and we've got the football playoffs, the NFL, this weekend, 3 games Saturday, 3 games Sunday. It's going to be a lot of fun. Week 17 was super exciting, too, with everything that happened. The Cleveland Browns almost choking away a playoff berth, and now they're in all kinds of trouble with COVID. But first topic, and I know you, Tim especially, is probably going to be coming after me about this, is the Philadelphia Eagles game against Washington on Sunday night. So just to set the scene, the Giants beat the Cowboys, so they would be in if Washington lost. Washington would be in with a win over Philadelphia on Sunday Night Football. It was a 3-point game. Jalen Hurts was not doing great, but he was still doing the job and doing a lot better than Carson Wentz did when he was still quarterback this season. 3-point game, and then Doug Peterson started making some questionable decisions. And Tim, I know the 3 of us were talking about this before we got on the air. This is not the first time that he's made some questionable decisions. Against the Packers, against the Seahawks. How about the game against the Seahawks when it was 4th down and he's throwing the ball into the end zone to nobody? He's having Carson Wentz try to throw the ball to the defense. Then the game, how about week 3 against the Bengals? A minute left. They have the ball at the Cincinnati 43 on 4th down. A minute left in overtime. Instead of trying to win the game, they punt it. they punt it and just settle for the tie. I mean, if you thought that week 17 was the first of this has been going on all season long. And I understand the theory of tanking, but this was obviously the most egregious. But we have seen this across, a few different teams this year. Of course, what happened in the Jets game against the Raiders? How about Jacksonville? Whenever they're playing somewhat well, they bring in Mike Glennon as the quarterback so they can throw the game away. I mean, this has been one of the worst years when it comes to tanking. And the fact that it came to this and ended up costing the Giants a playoff spot, even as an Eagles fan, I really can't stand for what Doug Peterson did in the fourth quarter of that game.
Yeah, I really can't stand it, Eddie, either. But, I'm not going to sit here and say in the aspect of the Giants that they were robbed in the regards to the fact that they had 16 games to control their fate. They had opportunities, and realistically, one Evan Ingram drop that turned into an interception, or I should say rather really turned into a fourth down error, ultimately cost the Giants heading to the playoffs this year. Now, ultimately this, however, and I'm going to say this upon the Eagles situation, it's an embarrassment. It really is an embarrassment. It's not something that you really pursue. You mentioned, for example, Greg Williams' call against the Raiders. I beg to differ in regard to the fact that, yes, it cost him his job, but it's not like we haven't seen cover zero in a situation like that before, believe it or not. And unfortunately, the Jets just didn't have the talent to really secure that man-to-man situation late in a game. Greg Williams is known for being aggressive as a coach, and I will give him that credit of at least trying to attempt something, even though he knew it wasn't going to work. However, the difference from the Jets, the difference from the Jaguars, might add, who you mentioned the quarterback changes, at least the fact that Mike Glennon was consistent, and they have tried to win football games with him under center. They haven't purposely blown games, in my opinion. In fact, Mike Glennon has come in times during injury and has continued to start football games and be competitive throughout football games, even though the Jacksonville Jaguars have not been able to get it done. The Cincinnati Bengals, for example, that's a team that you could question is going to continue to tank, but yet they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers on a primetime game and showed up to play despite their season already being eliminated. So let me ask you this. Week 17, you're out a week before, yet you're going to play 15 meaningful football games, and in the fourth quarter, egregiously, as you mentioned, Eddie, bring in Nate Sefeld to try to essentially give him playing time for next year. What are you evaluating? There is no evaluating. You have a rookie quarterback under center who is trying to develop and become the future of your football team. Understandably so, he was quote-unquote struggling, throwing 2 interceptions, I believe only 9 completions out of 20-something attempts, but he also ran for 2 touchdowns and gives your team a chance to win that football game. And I understand the win means nothing. It just hurts your draft stock. But let me tell you something. When your intent is not to win a football game, it is a massive issue, and that became very apparent. In fact, I make it to be put out to be worse than Deflategate itself. Think about this. At least during Deflategate, Bill Belichick had the intent, at least of his football team, to go out there and at least give them an advantage to try to win a football game. However, if you try to purposely lose, that takes away all, and I mean all, of the morals of sports. You're not going out there and trying. Your intent is to create failure. That takes away all moral aspects. Every single one of it. And the fact of the matter is, I understand that you can't fix this scenario. My ultimate factor is I think that you want to fix the scenario. You made a play-in game between both Giants and Washington because Washington didn't have to try to win that football game. They just had to show up. Philly was going to blow it regardless. If Dallas won the game, I'm 100% sure Philly would have been on the same schedule. But the fact of the matter is that that's not happening. And Doug Peterson should be held accountable. He should not have a job, in my opinion. He should never coach football again, not even in the Pee-wees, because what kind of coach gives up on their players? And especially, might I add what Travis Kelce said just 2 months before that, in December, when he talked about the football team losing. There should never be a moment where a team intends to lose. And when that moment happens, everyone should leave. And yet we saw that out of Doug Peterson. That Philadelphia team will not rally against him. He should be fired. And if I'm being honest, unfortunately, Philadelphia keeps him, they should be penalized. Because that is not acceptable. It is simply not acceptable. It's not fair for the fans of the Philadelphia Eagles. It is not fair for anyone watching that game that might have already gave criticism to the fact that an NFC East team is closing out the season to wrap up the 2020 regular season. But yet we saw that, and it's an absolute disgrace, no matter what way you put it. It should never happen again. And this is a big reason why the NFL should have a lottery system, because the Philadelphia Eagles do not deserve a top 10 pick in the draft, nor, in my opinion, right now, deserve to even have a say in what their football future looks like.
I mean, first, I see how uncomfortable Eddie's getting. It's so great. You're like, the Eagles should be penalized. They need this thing. And I agree, but Eddie's like, you see him sitting there, like, starting to, like, hyperventilate. He's like, don't ruin the future. Don't ruin the future. But I just wanted to say one thing. You mentioned the third string QB, and the fact that they used the excuse of him getting playing time. I know we didn't have preseason games this year, but you're probably going to get them next year, and he's going to get reps. And I know their QB situation is such a mess, but if you were trying to do anything, you put Carson Wentz back in. We talked about this before. I don't understand that aspect of it. I think, yes, it's not fair to the Giants, and it was an easy win for Washington, and I get that. And I don't think it was sportsmanlike, because even for people watching, like, you know how many little kids watch football? Like, to see, like, something like this, sometimes you can even hide it. Like, that sounds bad, but, like, if you're trying to lose, some teams hide it better than others. Do you remember, like, the 76ers a couple years ago when it was so unbelievably obvious that they were just tanking over and over again? This feels like that in a sense. And also, week 17, the one other issue I have with it, we've been talking about players and stuff like that all day. You put these players' jobs at stake, because those defensive linemen that you made jump off sides and things like that, they may not get re-signed next year, or when they go to another team and teams are looking at them, oh, they made a dumb mistake, or they did something where their mind was not in a play. But it wasn't them. It was on the coach. And I think, if anything, he knows he's not in jeopardy, but by doing that, he puts his players' future in jeopardy. And even if that future isn't in Philadelphia, that future could be anywhere else in the league. And for these players who are fighting to make cuts next year and already trying to show up for next year, in my opinion, I mean, I follow the worst team of all time. I follow the Lions. And week 17, all I care about after week 4 of the season is literally a draft pick. That is all I care about. But every week I go sit down and I want to see the players do well. If they lose, they lose. Great, you get a better draft pick. But if they win, they all pulled together and they did great. And I think that's something that, from a coach, you want to see a coach support your players. It's more than just a coach knocking down his team and wanting better for the future. It's a coach not realizing how he's hurting his players and the people in his organization right now, because it looks bad for them, but it looks even worse on the players themselves. And I think that was the problem with it, because the players are getting paid to be there. They can't say no. They can't be, no, coach, I'm not going to do that. Okay, get out of the game. It doesn't work that way. He has all the power and he's using it against them. And I think that really irks me.
Now, I agree with basically everything you guys said except for one thing. I still think Deflategate's worse than this, because I still think cheating a team out of a spot in the Super Bowl is a little worse than giving up on a game to see what team is going to get killed by Tampa Bay in the first round of the playoffs.
Okay, but let's put it like this. On the opposite end, the Colts still had an opportunity to score and fairly play against the New England Patriots in terms of a football game. When you have a team out there that's not trying, it's a one-sided affair. And that is why it's worse than Deflategate. Listen, there were still 2 football teams on the field. The Patriots had to play defense. Sure, they had an offensive advantage. But at the end of the day, if that defense doesn't hold, for example, as Zoe mentioned, the Detroit Lions, for example, who average allowing 50 points per game, it feels like at some points, you can score all you want, but you still have to try to hold on defensively to win. The Eagles at time on both offense and defense, especially as you mentioned in the fourth quarter, might I add, when things really start getting suspicious, you go for it on 4th down when you have a chance to tie the football game. Then you proceed to bring in Nate Sudfeld. He starts off beautifully with an interception. Then he fumbles. The team doesn't even want to pick him up. You could tell everyone on that sideline is upset the situation. I believe they proceed to punt again the next drive, and yet the experiment isn't over. And then on defense, 4th and 1, hard count, jump off sides. Okay, first one, so be it. Then it happens a second time. And if I'm not mistaken, it happened nearly a third time, but the Eagles were just barely able to get a stop. And let me add something like this. I've never seen Al Michaels, Chris Collinsworth so angry in their lives. Not because of the fact that they had to be at that football game, but when you see them being outspoken about a situation like this, they weren't this outspoken about the Deflategate. So this is a big issue.
Everyone else was so outspoken about Deflategate, and they weren't. I don't know. I feel like Deflategate, this was bad, but Deflategate was worse because this was so obvious, and this is for a draft pick, but that's for a Super Bowl. That's for a ring. That's for the rest of history. And that's also the fact that Bill Belichick was sure he was getting away with it. That's everything else. His intent was to be sneaky, and I'm sure Doug Peterson's intent was to be sneaky too, but obviously he had some trouble with that, and it wasn't sneaky at all. But I think it's kind of a different situation because you have to remember, this is the Eagles. This is the whole division that all year has been the division that is whoever makes it from that division, as Eddie said, is going to get crushed in the playoffs. And I don't like the fact in general that they lost the game on purpose, but I don't think it's as bad as Deflategate because it wasn't going to affect who won the Super Bowl. And
this is one thing where I beg to differ, Zoe, because the big thing is about this situation with Doug Peterson isn't simply the fact that he was trying to be sneaky about it. That's where I beg to differ. He said he was going to put Nate Suffield in at some point in the game last week.
So that's even worse.
Think about that. But he said it. But come on now. You're battling for a win, and you're going to sub out your starting quarterback?
I still feel like it's worse if you try to get away with it. At least if you come clean about it and say that's what you're doing.
But it's a matter of, okay, you wanted to give him some reps. Well, is some reps throwing an interception, fumbling the following drive, and then failing yet again when you have a chance to win and, create some positive momentum going to the offseason? That team battled through injury this year. That team had a lot of issues to face. One draft pick in the first round isn't going to save the Philadelphia Eagles cap issues. I hate to say it. So I don't know what his big picture analysis is, but it's clearly, and I if I'm being honest, I almost now appreciate Ben McAdoo with a lot of his decision-making more than I appreciate Doug Peterson delivering the Philadelphia Eagles one Super Bowl. Because that is an absolute embarrassment. In fact, I'm going to go as far as saying I appreciate Adam Gase more than I appreciate Doug Peterson being a coach in the NFL. Because that is a disaster.
Okay, here's the one argument I got to make here. I think you're saying, Doug Peterson's intentions, I think, are pretty clear. And I don't care what he said to the media a couple of weeks ago. The entire season, I think he's been done with this team. Thinking about since that week 3 game against the Bengals, the Eagles have had many points this year where they've made stupid decisions. And I know he's been bold with things. I know he goes for 2 a lot. Of course, he ran the Philly special in the Super Bowl. But this year, it's a weekly thing that they do these weird things that you'd expect from like Oregon college football, like with Marcus Mariota. And you can't be doing that with Carson Wentz. Like that, I think that's the issue here. And my concern with the Eagles is that I've been always a supporter of Nick Foles over Carson Wentz, and I don't know how great Carson Wentz actually is, but if you're going to choose Doug Peterson as your coach over Carson Wentz as your quarterback, I think you're making a big mistake going into the future. But Eagles and Giants, there's one thing they share in common. They're not playing this weekend. So let's move towards the teams that actually are in the playoffs. Let's start with that NFC East matchup with Washington against the Buccaneers. First things first, me and Tim, we're going to continue our pick'em for every playoff game heading through. Currently, I'm 4 games ahead of Tim, but if some craziness happens in the playoffs, Tim could always catch up. But let's start talking about Washington against the Buccaneers, because the Buccaneers have clearly come together. Zoe, when the Lions were playing them, wasn't just checkdowns from Tom Brady. And I know the Lions were without their head coach in that game. But this is
not just their head coach. For the record, not just their head coach. You also have to remember they're playing against a Lions team that we can't even get into that. But they literally had assistants and interim people running every single coaching position. So that's all I will say. But yes, he did throw some nice deep passes. When that happened, I did think of you. I was like, hey, he's gonna grill me for this. I did, but it's okay. I'm past it. I'm past it.
Yeah, there's a second thing I want to grill you about also with the Buccaneers from the last time you were on, that Antonio Brown getting more playing time was going to throw off the entire chemistry of the team. He's doing pretty well, and I don't see any chaos happening because, like I said, for whatever reason, Tom Brady and Antonio Brown have kind of meshed together. It happened during that 1 week in New England because, it wasn't Antonio Brown and Tom Brady fighting. That's the reason he left the Patriots. It's because he got in trouble. I mean, that Tom Brady had nothing to do with it, and now he brings him back to Tampa, and they've been working together really well, especially with Mike Evans now being hurt. And
exactly, because someone else is hurt, then he steps up into a bigger role. I'm just saying. Also,
that's not. No, I'm saying that he didn't throw off the chemistry of the team, because that's what you were arguing last time, that you were concerned that Antonio Brown's moxie and mindset was going to throw off the entire.
If he didn't get the touches he wanted, and what did he get last week or 2 weeks ago? He got the number of touches that got him to get a salary cap bonus or whatever, with however money he gets on his salary. What did he get? How many catches was it? Like 10, 13?
Yeah, but he can't control the amount of catches he's getting. I mean, regardless.
No, but I'm saying because he's getting the production.
Yeah, but the Bucs, and this is one thing, and I was watching the Pat McAfee show the other day in particular, give the Bucs a lot of credit because there's a lot of franchises that have these bonuses and incentives that you put in the contracts that they purposely, when you get about 90% of the way there, suspiciously throwing you onto the bench towards the end of the season to try to not get you to that bonus. But yet the Buccaneers kept to their word with most of their players this year, and they popped up week 17, said, hey, if you have any things that you're trying to pursue towards a bonus, whatever, let's go for it this week. They tried a lot of different things. So give them credit in that regard that not just Antonio Brown, but other players on that team had a motivation to play week 17, knowing that their fate was already locked and sealed. And I think that's really a big reason why we saw them be so successful and will continue to be successful coming towards the postseason, because this isn't teams worrying about their future, worrying about contracts, whatever. They're just going out there to play football and have fun doing it. And Eddie, as to what you've mentioned with Brady and AB in particular, I'm seeing this really throughout the entire offense. Since the last time we saw them, quote unquote, struggle, this team's really meshed well together. They're starting to find their entity and really become a good, solid football team, both offensively and defensively, and becoming that Super Bowl threat that we anticipated at the start of the year.
Yeah, and I mean, this has really been a culmination of these last few weeks. These last 3 or 4 games, I know it hasn't been against the steepest competition, but Tom Brady has been, going all out in the first half, and he has so many weapons. And if these guys can stay healthy going into the playoffs, this is the one benefit they have that's a rarity for NFL teams. They have so many guys with playoff experience. With the NFL being a sport where there's typically short careers compared to the other major sports, it's rare that you get a band of veterans that all come together, even on these smaller deals, and have a chance to compete for a championship. And that's what Tampa Bay has. Now, I don't see them going all the way to the Super Bowl. I will be honest with that. But, I have them winning this game against Washington, and we'll see what happens after that. But I think there's a lot to be excited about. But let's talk about that actual game. We'll kind of go through each game one at a time, and we'll have Zoe add her input, and then me and Tim will make our picks. So, Zoe, I kind of hinted that I thought this was not really going to be close, even with the good story of Alex Smith. But what do you see happening in the Bucs-Washington game?
I think it was funny that you didn't even hint it, because I thought this was implied. But I don't think it's going to be close. I know Washington has pulled off some nice play, I guess you would call it. But at the end of the day, it is still Tom Brady. It's Tom Brady in the playoffs. He's scary in the playoffs. As you mentioned, they do have playoff experience. I don't see it going any other way than the Bucs winning this game by a landslide, because they're going to come out fighting, especially because, as you mentioned, a lot of these guys, the Bucs aren't going to be a team that, some teams are very young and you see them go to the playoffs and they're going to be a dynasty for a long time. That's not what the Bucs are. You have Tom Brady, who's on his last leg, basically. You have these other guys who are veterans, who are nearing their end of the time in the league. And if not their end, they're going to get a new contract. And the Bucs, simply put it, they cannot afford to keep bringing this team back because it costs too much money or someone's going to give out and it's not going to happen. So I think they know this is one of their last chances, and maybe it's one of their first chances too, but it's now or never for them. And I think because of that, they just have to go into this game as if they would play any other game. And as long as they don't play down to Washington, I think they'll be fine. And considering what they've done the past couple weeks of the season where they've played bad teams like the Lions and they've lit them up to the point where Tom Brady was benched at halftime because he already had over 400 yards and 40 points on the board. If they put up any sort of show like that, you just can't see Washington's offense meet that. Who, they have Logan Thomas and Scary Terry? That's it. There's no way you meet that in any sense. The Buccaneers as an overall are more well-rounded. And I think depending on the team, they could go far just because it's Tom Brady in the playoffs. And you can't put that past him. I know he doesn't have Bill Belichick, but he's getting it done. He's playing at a higher level now than he may have been in a lot of his years with Belichick because he's throwing the ball. And Eddie, I'll give that one to you. I didn't know he could do that. I really did not at all. I don't know where that skill came from. Maybe someone injected it into him. I'm not sure. But he didn't have that in New England. And that makes Tom Brady even scarier in the playoffs than he was in any of the past years we've seen.
And I think there's one more factor, and then I'll let Tim add to this game. But I think I mentioned this earlier. He wants revenge for how last season ended. I mean, that was an embarrassing loss to the Titans. I mean, everybody thought New England was going to win that game. And throwing an interception in the end zone ended up being his final pass as a Patriot. I mean, he's already, kind of stuck it to Belichick with the Bucs in the playoffs and New England going home at 7-9. But, he'd love to go one step further with a win. I have the Buccaneers beating Washington pretty easily in this game. Tim, are you in agreement?
I do the Buccaneers beating Washington, but I don't think it's really going to be a blowout. Just hear me out here for a moment, because it really does depend on how the Bucs open up against this Washington team. And I do want to take one instance this year. Let's not forget the primetime game in which they played the New York Giants, the only NFC East team they saw this season, on Monday Night Football. The Giants won majority of that game and nearly had won the football game had Evan Ingram especially and Daniel Jones not fallen apart in the fourth quarter, in which the Bucs walked away with the victory. The point is that if we see that team consistently to open up, there is potential for domination, as both of you are predicting. However, we cannot underrate this Washington defense in particular. This defense has really come together well over the past 5.5 weeks, in my opinion. They've really started to get better as a unit offensively. And sure, I dig the Alex Smith comeback story. I'm not saying this team's going to win the football game by any means, but I'm not going to say count them out either. I think McLaurin's done a very good job this year as a wideout. But the way the Washington football team has a chance at this football game, if I'm being honest, is running the football. If they're able to control time, limit the amount of possessions Tom Brady gets, there's a very good chance that they will still be in at the end of this game. It's going to be very tough, don't get me wrong, but that's where they're going to need to find their success against this Buccaneers defense. You need to challenge them right at the nose, challenge those tackles, those linebackers anyway. I say this, though, on the Tampa Bay side. If you're lacking that offensive ability early on and Washington's able to do that, they're going to give you a good run for your money. But when it's all said and done, I expect Antonio Brown to shine. I definitely expect Rob Gronkowski to shine, because let's not forget, he's done a very good job to end this season and starting to come back to form. Again, I think the Bucs are going to win, but don't expect it to really be that potential blowout. I think that we're not giving this Washington team enough credit defensively.
That's fair. I mean, you never know what's going to happen, but I still have a lot of faith in Tampa Bay's offense to jump out early. But we've spent enough on this game. Let's move on to what I think is one of the more intriguing matchups of the wild card round. It's the Seahawks and the Rams. And I think this game really plays into the Rams' favor if Jared Goff is indeed healthy. He told everybody he was fine. He told the press that yesterday after missing Week 17 with a thumb injury. But, I mean, Russell Wilson has had a decent year throwing the ball, but he's been sacked so much. I mean, after Joe Burrow got hurt, we knew how much he was getting sacked. I believe Russell Wilson then is the most sacked quarterback in the NFL this season, and that's for a mobile guy. The offensive line has struggled, and when you have to go up against Aaron Donald, that's not going to help things. So I think that this could be a really interesting game that could go back and forth. Zoe, I'll get your take first. What do you expect to see in the Seahawks-Rams matchup?
The Rams defense, if you look at them, they're so good. And I agree with you. It totally comes down to whether Jared Goff plays or not. And I completely agree with that. But also you look at the fact that the Seahawks have had some weeks this year that weren't so great. And they've blown some games they shouldn't have blown. And other than, honestly, if you look at it, other than Russell Wilson, who, in comparison to what he usually does, has fully tanked this season. If you look at him, how he usually plays, he is an MVP candidate year after year. Was the beginning of this year. He's basically fallen off the radar. And that could be because your line sucks and you don't have the run game that you usually do. And that's great. But basically, it's just him and DK Metcalf. And it's the two of them. And the two of them alone can't beat the whole Rams defense. You can't beat Aaron Donald and his whole squad and everyone else around him who's been playing really well. You can't beat a Jalen Ramsey who's playing at a level that's ridiculous. You can't beat these guys. And I want the Seahawks to win. And on my podcast, I did pick them to win because I love an underdog story. But if it comes down to it, I don't see them winning if Jared Goff plays or unless Russell Wilson that we know comes out and plays.
I'll let you share in a second, but I'm going to just do my pick. I think Seattle will pull this out because I think it's a similar thing to Tampa Bay. Russell Wilson does have a lot of playoff experience, and over the last 10 years or so, other than New England, I'd argue Seattle has been the next best team in terms of consistency in the playoffs, even in supposedly down years. I mean, after the 2 years they went to the Super Bowl, they still won some playoff games and put up a good fight, even in years when their defense was not nearly as talented as the 12th man era around 2012, 2013. So I'm going to roll with Seattle in this one, but I do think the Rams keep it close. Tim, how about you?
Well, I'm going to ask you this, and both you guys this. Do we think that this is going to be a matchup similar to how Seattle tends to go against Arizona of years past in regard to the fact that it's going to be a purely defensive football game? And I know now, as I start to say, it sounds crazy because of how bad Seattle's defense has been this year. But at the same time, you know, when we look at this game, you know, this Rams team has the capability offensively of being a major weapon. Sean McVay knows what he's doing, and I think that he has a powerful enough defense that Aaron Donald can take off that entire offensive line just by himself. I think that this defense is going to be impactful, in particular for LA, in regards to the fact that they're going to create pressure on Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson has not been able to offensively create production as much as he has since that bye week when this team really started dealing with injuries. So I think we're going to see a low-scoring game. And this is the reason why, again, I'm going to ask you guys how you feel about it. But I see this being a low-scoring game and benefit of the Rams. They know that if they win this game, they're likely going to be the team that faces Green Bay because, let's be honest, the Bears aren't going to win. And I really think that the Rams have a lot of potential this playoff of really being that big spoiler that we see every single season.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting game, and you know, if the Rams can keep it close, and I think it's a similar story to Washington. I mean, they could have a chance if they can shut down the opposing quarterback, and I think they have much more of a chance than Washington does with how Russell Wilson has played this season. But I do think that he will prevail based on how he's performed in the playoffs in the past. But let's talk about the last NFC game, the SpongeBob game on Nickelodeon. Mitchell Trubisky somehow made it to the playoffs, and him and the Bears are going to face off with the Saints, who, just like last year, Drew Brees gets mutilated a few games into the season. They take him out. They bring in a backup quarterback. They win all of those games, and now they're the 2 seed. And I mean, think about these last 3 years with how the Saints postseason has ended. A tough loss to the Vikings, the controversial loss to the Rams, and then the Minneapolis Miracle. I mean, those are 3 brutal losses. And I mean, if you even think about the last 10 years or so, I saw something on Twitter 10 years ago today was when Marshawn Lynch had that crazy run when the Seahawks, who did not have a good team that year and had Matt Hasselbeck as their quarterback, beat the Saints in the wild card round. It has not been good for New Orleans in the playoffs since they won that Super Bowl back in 2009. Well, made that Super Bowl back in 2009. And I think this year is finally the turning point, especially with the rumors that this could be Drew Brees' final season. I think that they are going to handle the Bears pretty well. And I'm going to go beyond that. I know it's down the road. I think they could be a serious contender. I think they're the only team that could possibly beat Green Bay and win the NFC. But I think they're definitely winning this matchup with the Bears. Zoe, what's your take on this game?
I mean, I take any opportunity I want to hate on the Bears. You know, I love hating on the Bears. And more than anything, I just want to say, kind of a shot at Mr. Trubisky, but I think it's really funny that this playoff game is on Nickelodeon because his season has been something of like a children's show. And I think it's funny that it's on Nickelodeon because it just fits into him. But I do feel for the Saints in this game just because I feel for Drew Brees. He keeps getting hurt year after year. He keeps coming back. He does great. And I know they've had all their woes and all these issues going in. But I think it comes down to how bad does Drew Brees want it? How bad does the team around him want it? How bad do they want to give it to him? As you mentioned, I do think this is his last year, especially just because the injury last year wasn't as serious as the injury this year. The injury this year was a lot more serious. And the way he's playing, I don't think this team, sure, it's a young team, but Michael Thomas was out pretty much the whole season. And the fact they were still able to do well, I think proves your team. Also, the fact that you have to remember Kamara, his ridiculous game a couple weeks ago, if he can put anything like that, I mean, last year we saw Derrick Henry single-handedly beat the Ravens just because of how powerful his running was. And I think if you see anything like that from Kamara, they single-handedly beat the Bears because who are you running through? Khalil Mack? Yeah, Khalil Mack is scary, but he hasn't been the Khalil Mack we're used to. And it's also the Bears. I know we've talked about choking and everything, but it's the Bears. It's Mitchell Trubisky. I think if you even give Mitch Trubisky a chance in this game, I think it's an issue. And I think if he somehow gets that chance, I may just have to retire from talking about football because I don't think I can anymore.
Tim, you in agreement here?
I'm in agreement. And like I said a few moments ago, if, you guys mentioned that Tampa Bay versus Washington is going to be the blowout game, this is going to be the blowout game. Listen, I don't see the Bears as a playoff team. In my opinion, Arizona was more of a playoff team than they were. I know that they suffered through injuries, unfortunately, with Kyler Murray that really separated them from the bunch. But when this is all said and done, I mean, the offense is a question. You don't know what offense you're getting every single Sunday out there with Mitchell Trubisky under center. And the fact that you have to face a pretty solid defense, except for when they were facing, Minnesota and the Minneapolis Miracle, for the Saints, they're going to be pretty consistent. And the pressure really for New Orleans, Eddie, you mentioned obviously Drew Brees. I really think it goes on Alvin Kamara because let me tell you something. And Zoe mentioned a great game that he had a few weeks back. But the thing about Alvin Kamara of late, especially in the playoffs, is that he really hasn't been that powering punch that we see him to be in the regular season. And that's not saying that he chokes, but the usage and how he's used is much different from the regular season. Let's not forget that the Saints MVP last year in the playoffs was Taysom Hill. So my thing is, how do you challenge the running game and how successful is Alvin Kamara going to be? How useful is Taysom Hill going to be in terms of pulling the stops against the Chicago Bears team? Because again, this is going to be a one-sided affair. The Saints are going to win, but I really think how they approach this game is going to really paint the picture of what Saints team we're going to see moving forward towards the divisional round.
So let's shift gears to the AFC now, and let's start with the game that I see the upset happening in. It's going to be the Ravens rematch against the Titans in Tennessee. But, ever since Lamar Jackson came back from the bathroom against the Cleveland Browns, I mean, he has been lights out. He has finally restored that, MVP level. I didn't know if he was coming back to that. I said it at the beginning of the year because, it's much easier to figure out a running quarterback than a throwing quarterback. But Lamar Jackson has kicked it into high gear. And I think now that he's had 2 appearances in the postseason, he can finally, perform to how he's supposed to play in the playoffs. And the Titans, I mean, they almost lost to the Houston Texans. They gave the Colts a lot of optimism last week. And I mean, we've seen all week with Deshaun Watson, the Texans are insanely dysfunctional. The fact that they almost lost to Romeo Crennel and the Texans is not a good sign. I think the Titans are a good team. I think this is going to be the best of the 6 wildcard games, but I think Baltimore is going to pull off an upset and move on to the second round. Zoe, what do you think you're going to see in this one?
For me, this is the closest game that's going to be there. I think this is the best game. This is a game that if I could only tune into one, I'd watch this game just because of how high-powered both these teams can be. And I think if you look at it, sure, the Titans have had their games where they may have not been fantastic, but also you have to remember the weapons they have. I mean, you have A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, who the king of himself of the playoffs last year. Tannehill, I don't really believe in, but he gets the job done where he is. Corey Davis, who has been a decent receiver when you need him, and Jonnu Smith, who has really stepped up this year. So if you look at the targets he has all the tools to be great. So I think if anything, it comes down to 2 things. It comes down to the Ravens defense, because if they stay on the field a lot and they give Tennessee a lot of opportunities, Tennessee's going to take the opportunities. But the thing is that Tennessee runs a lot of the same plays. If you look at what they run, a play works, they'll run it 6 more times in the next 5 minutes. That's the way they run. I don't really understand it. It's their coaching strategy, and I guess it works. If Baltimore can figure them out and their defense can figure them out, it's going to be an easy ride for them. The other thing, Baltimore's run game. Sorry, thinking too much about the defense. Their run game. When their run game gets going, that's been the struggle for them all season, but when it gets going, they're good. And if they can get that run game going, Lamar can do whatever he wants. He can find Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown has had some games where he's sucked, but he's had some games where he can be great. And I think if Lamar can settle in and not feel the pressure that you visibly saw on TV that he felt last year when he was breaking down during the game, if you run the ball, take the pressure off Lamar a little bit, and just let him shine and be comfortable, I think it's the Ravens game the whole time.
And I'll let Tim speak in a second, but the thing with Lamar Jackson, too, I think this Browns game was really a learning experience for him. Because if you think about it, there have not been a lot of close games that he's been a part of. Because over the past couple years, all their wins have seemed like routes. And then the losses, I mean, when those games against the Chiefs, they get embarrassed every year when they put them against Kansas City. I mean, now that he's had to play in a close game and he's prevailed, I think it's some added confidence for him. And that's kind of why I'm feeling like Baltimore could win this game. Tim, what's your feeling on this one?
I agree with you. I think that Baltimore can win this football game. They have a big purpose to get their payback against Tennessee after last year. And, it's funny, Robert Griffin III said, I'm trying to get my bike back. Even though he's not going to be on the football field, he wants to come back, get his revenge, and essentially steal his bike back to bring that bike back to Baltimore. If I'm being honest, the last few weeks have reminded me what this Baltimore team has the potential to be. And I know this sounds weird, but I'm really more scared of this Baltimore Ravens that we're currently seeing than last year's Baltimore Ravens that were the powerhouses going into the playoffs. I think everything's starting to click. Baltimore had to deal with a lot of injuries to open up the year. They've had their struggles, and yes, I get it. Lamar Jackson had an underwhelming season compared to last year. But who cares about underwhelming years if you win the Super Bowl? I think Lamar has learned through his postseason failures the last few seasons of how to manage a football game, but now it's putting it all together. With the exception of the Kansas City Chiefs, this is arguably the toughest team you're going to face in the entirety of the NFL playoffs this year. So I really think that they need to manage this football game and be that offense that they've been. I think this is going to be a high-scoring affair for the record, not a low-scoring affair. How does Tennessee manage Derrick Henry? That is yet to be seen, and how they're going to successfully handle this Baltimore team. But if they're able to match the amount of offense Baltimore is going to come with, then they may have a chance. But I really think that this Baltimore team is something to be a threat in the AFC playoff run, and I really think they're going to dominate this game.
So 2 more games to get to. Let's start in Buffalo with the Bills facing off with the Colts. I mean, the Bills have been rolling these past couple of weeks. They almost put up 60 on the Dolphins, and I mean, they crushed New England on Monday Night Football, kind of stick it to Bill Belichick. It's the first time they beat them twice in a season since 2000. So, definitely some incentive there. But we've seen a history throughout sports where teams that come cruising into the playoffs with no issues finally run into some problems in the postseason. I still think the Bills are going to win this game, but I think this is the game that turns out to be surprisingly close and closer than people expected because Phillip Rivers has been playing really well. We thought last year with the Chargers that this was the end of Phillip Rivers. And when he signed with the Colts, nobody was expecting him to perform how he has. He's made the Colts a competitive team. He's put them up right on par with the Titans, who are a very talented team, where they were in position to nearly win the division if there wasn't that fluky field goal at the end of the game. So the Colts are rolling, and I think Indianapolis is going to put up a nice fight. But Buffalo's offense, I think, is just going to be too strong. Josh Allen has been playing. If it weren't for Aaron Rodgers this year, Josh Allen would probably be the leading MVP candidate for how he's carried this Buffalo team. And one other thing, we haven't been able to talk much about home field advantage in the past year, but the Bills are going to be playing in front of 6,600 fans, which isn't much, but it's the first time they've played in front of fans in over a year. And you know there's that historic curse with Buffalo in the postseason. I think they're going to get a win, but I do think it's going to be kind of close. Zoe, what's your take on this one?
I mean, you mentioned the fans. I think especially after a year now in COVID times, I think fans matter more than ever because if Buffalo, if they get down or they have a bad drive, you come back over and you see fans cheering for you, it doesn't have to be a full stadium. It's just the fact that there are people there. It feels like an actual football game. I think that's something that, honestly, in my opinion, I think it's the mental thing that's plagued teams all year. It's COVID hitting everyone, and this doesn't feel like a real season. This is what everyone's been saying about every sport. I'm surprised the season went through all the way. I know I talked about that with you two, that we didn't know if the season was even going to make it to the playoffs. And I think it comes down to, you see that there's fans there. This is a real game, and you get in the game. And also the fact we're also talking about Josh Allen. Diggs has been fantastic as a receiver there. I see the Bills taking this one over the Colts just because I think if you lay it out, they have the better team. And it's going to come down to who wants it more in this game because I do think it's going to be a close game. But just the way Phil Rivers was with the Chargers, he had some crazy games, and I get he's been playing great, but Josh Allen's been playing better. And that's where it comes down to because the Bills have suffered so many losses, and it's even like the Ravens you're talking about. They want revenge. They want to come back. And the fact that the Bills get a chance to win here to prove that they are the real deal. That's what Josh Allen's been trying to prove his whole career. No one believes in the kid. He always gets hurt. He goes for the extra thing. Oh, he comes so close to MVP, but he never gets it because everyone's just a little bit better. He gets to prove just what he's made of to the whole world and to fans that are there that he hasn't had in a year. I think the Bills take it, but I do agree it's going to be close.
Tim?
You know what? I think that this wild card week needs a surprise somewhere. And unfortunately, I just can't stand watching Phillip Rivers choke more times in the NFL playoffs than kids he actually has. So with that being said, I know it's a little bit savage, but with that being said, I have the Indianapolis Colts winning this football game. And I don't know why, if I'm being honest. I just think the NFL needs a surprise somewhere. Listen, everything is to this point is going on paper of who we exactly think is going to win of better football teams. This Colts defense has the potential of being a very solid, put-together defense as they've been over the last few seasons. They're healthy. They have a lot of positive motivations. Now, the big thing about this Colts team is that if their run game is successful early, like it's been earlier on in this season, don't start passing the ball to try to get the passing game going. Just let Phillip keep on handing off and keep on being successful, just like how the Tennessee Titans are essentially with Derrick Henry. I think this Colts team is a lot better than what their record shows. They're a lot better than a wild card team might add. And if I'm being honest, I mean, they don't have a chance against Kansas City. No one does. But I think that this is a team simply that is a lot better than what they look to be. And unfortunately for Bills fans, they're due for another disappointment. Things have gone way too well for this Buffalo team this year that something is bound to go wrong. I think that this is going to be our first surprising NFL playoffs, and I think the Colts are going to make a good run.
I do want to say, even though I'm not picking them, kudos to the Colts because only a year and a half ago, their franchise quarterback retires out of nowhere right before the preseason. And I know Andrew Luck had been hurt for a couple of years, but I mean, that was a shock to this team and completely threw them off guard. And the fact that a year later, I mean, Frank Reich has proved to be a great coach coming over from the Eagles. And I think that you really have to credit this team and how they've been performing. But, I've got my upset coming with this last game that I've got to talk about. The Cleveland Browns and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I know the Browns will be without their head coach. I know they've been laden with COVID for the last 3 weeks. I also know that they've ended the season with a loss to the Jets and a near loss to Mason Rudolph. But I am going to say this. Times change, and the Browns have had so much bad luck over the last 20 to 25 years, ever since the new Cleveland Browns were created. Ever since Bill Belichick was there, things have fallen apart. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, I know they've gotten things back on track. I have no faith in this team. I said it when they were undefeated to watch that game against Washington that there was a chance they were going to lose. It happened. That performance then against the Bengals on Monday Night Football was completely embarrassing. And I don't care about Juju dancing on the logo or whatever added incentive. They played terribly. It wasn't just the defense being motivated. Steelers defense, which is, the thing that everybody was so excited about. I know they've had some injuries, but if you can't stop Ryan Finley, then as much as I'll criticize Baker Mayfield, you're not stopping Baker Mayfield. So I think the upset of the playoffs is going to happen with the Cleveland Browns taking down the Pittsburgh Steelers, even without Kevin Stefanski there. Zoe, what do you think about this?
I was so excited to take the same pick and then fight you guys on it. Oh my God. The whole time I was like, when Tim was like, oh, I'm picking the Colts, I was like, oh, I'm fine. I'm going to pick the Browns. So it's all going to go well for me. And then Eddie stole my thunder, but it's fine. Going into it, I think the Steelers are so overrated. And one of my closest friends is a Steelers fan, and I've been telling her this all season. We talked about this just a couple weeks ago. They're completely overrated. They can't get going in games. They can't keep it going. You have Ben Roethlisberger, who's 1,000 years old. You have Juju as one of your only receivers there. You have Claypool as well. You have, I don't even know where to start with it. You have a million injuries. And then the Browns, I get they're the Browns. I understand they're the laughingstock of the league. That's great. Baker Mayfield, I don't always believe in him. But when he gets stuff going and when he wants it, he gets it. And I think that Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are still really scary. And that's something that I don't think people realize is that Nick Chubb was out for a couple weeks, but when he came back, he had a great week. And I think that's also something is that if they can get both sides of the ball and let Baker Mayfield do his thing, they're going to be okay. And then you talk about even just looking at like the Steelers defense, as you were saying, Eddie, it's not as strong as everyone thinks it is. And I don't know, people are like, oh, it's one of the best defenses in the league and everything about it. But they've had so many injuries and they've had so much trouble stopping people. The Steelers pride themselves on their defense. They're not getting anywhere with their defense. You need offense. I get defense gets you 2 championships and stuff like that. But honestly, in today's game, it's a lot more offense because it doesn't matter what your defense does if your offense can't score points. And I have no faith in Ben Roethlisberger to do anything with his life. So that's where I am. I will let you go for it, Tim.
On a regular situation where both of these teams came in, let's say, even, I would have said the Cleveland Browns, just like both of you guys, in a heartbeat. But I just don't really know. And unfortunately for Browns fans, it's another year of suffering, but I just don't know if they can get it done. I mean, first off, because I really haven't been following the Browns situation since the COVID announcement first happened, are any of his receivers, Baker's receivers, even eligible based upon their last COVID issue? Do we know?
To my knowledge, Jarvis Landry and Higgins are both going to be back. I think Peoples-Jones got quarantined again. I don't know 100% for sure, but most of them are back by this point. The issue is not having Stefanski.
Of course, it's on the play calling aspect, and you just hope that there's no more COVID cases going into the weekend because that, again, can continue to change things in a heartbeat. And I'm sure, if I'm being honest, if the outbreak gets bigger, the NFL may start having that conversation about rescheduling the game to a later date in the week. But with that being said, with everything they have to deal with, I would personally like to see Cleveland win. But I just can't. I think Pittsburgh sneaks this one away somehow, some way. Yes, they're a one-dimensional football team. They have not been good on the defensive end since Bud Dupree got hurt. But, I mean, the Steelers just have the man up right now in regards to the fact that they actually have their football team still somewhat put together without coronavirus. They survived, might I add, the toughest schedule probably in NFL history, not regarding opponents, but regarding the fact that they didn't really have a bye week and had to figure out how to play throughout the season to keep everyone healthy. I know also we might have to add that they didn't play their starters week 17. Rather, that was a strategical aspect of Mike Tomlin to play the Cleveland Browns yet again, or simply give his guys rest. We'll wait and see. But expect at least some energy out of that offense. Again, I know it's still one-dimensional and they struggle in the run game, but I just don't know, honestly, what to expect from Cleveland. I mean, might I add, this same team that dealt with COVID issues, and I understand that Baker's going to have receivers based upon your report, Eddie, this week, but let's not forget this team lost to the Jets when they had everything going wrong. And in that response, too, Nick Chubb was in that game against the Jets and didn't do much on his birthday. I don't know what to expect, if I'm being honest, but I think Pittsburgh barely squeaks this one out.
Well, all I can say is it's going to be fun to watch, and having 2 more games, I really like this move by the NFL, also adding more exclusivity to the bye that only one team gets it. And I know the Chiefs clinched in the AFC. 425 on Sunday with the NFC was really fun to watch because there were 3 teams that still had a chance at getting that one bye, which means so much because only one team in each conference is in a situation where a win gets them into the conference championship, and I like that move. But regardless, it's going to about wrap things up today. Zoe, thanks so much for coming on again, as always, to help us preview this postseason.
Of course, I'll always debate you guys about football every time.
And we can talk to you about the Lions another time as well, because I see Matthew Stafford, the jersey in the background, but, we can talk about that another time.
Down soon. After this season, who knows? It might be going.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, there's a lot of quarterbacks out there in the draft, and we'll see what Detroit and other teams do down the road. But until next week, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
We hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Enjoy all the games. This is Sports Speak.